Hi, this is Steinfeld for New Realities, and I have back on my show one of my favorite guests, Deepak Chopra. And recently I saw in the media, he put out statements to President-elect Obama particularly, about how to convert this war economy to a peace economy. So I'll be talking to him about that and some of the ramifications that brings. And from the point of view that I'm coming from is that we're here in a place in our world history where it could be the flowering of humanity. We can go beyond survival, and we can start to form a global village, as Marshall McLuhan said.
Let me just react to what you
Sure.
said. We are in the flowering of a new reality.
Yes.
That's the name of your show, so I'm glad that you like to see everything like that. But we're at a crossroads. Either we could flower into a new reality, or we could destruct totally, completely.
Yes.
We have a very interesting situation right now where we have ancient, tribal, primitive, barbaric habits. There's no denying that. And at the same time, we have modern capacities. I can think of many scenarios where our current technologies in the hands of a primitive mind can destroy the world. So we're at this crossroads, you know. Either we completely take a new breakthrough, saying that the old system has totally broken down,
Right.
and emerge into what you call the new reality, or nature might be saying the human species was an interesting experiment that did not work.
You know, I think terrorism is a tragic expression of an unmet need. Humans don't necessarily want to kill. We are in a collective mind, and people have needs that aren't being met. So we need to formulate groups and societies that will go out and meet the needs and hear what the needs of these so-called terrorists are. You know, a terrorist to somebody is a freedom fighter to somebody else. So what are the needs of these people? That's what we have to address. That's the bottom line.
It's very complex, Alan.
Yeah.
To some extent it is that people who are disenfranchised or marginalized or poor or uneducated or have not become aware of their greater identity, that they will use violence as a method not only for survival but also to make a statement. That's definitely part of the fact. But the other part of this whole thing is purely biological. You know, we have a part of our brain which is called the reptilian brain. It's 300 million years old as compared to our cortical brain, which you're trying to invoke right now to create the new reality. The reptilian brain is 300 million years old, and it functions basically on what is called the fight or flight response. It's violent. Human beings are violent like other creatures are. We use a popular phrase in evolution, which is survival of the fittest. So if you want to get what you want and you can't get it, then you kill the person who has it. So that's, you know, part of our biological history, and we cannot deny it.
Yeah.
The problem is that, as some evolutionary biologists have said, survival of the fittest won't work anymore. It's not going to work anymore. A permanently victorious species, which we have become, having destroyed the other species and the ecosystem, risks its own extinction.
Exactly.
So if we are to survive, then we have to move to the next stage of our evolution, what somebody like a great scientist called Jonas Salk said, survival of the wisest. That wisdom has to become the new criterion for our evolution. Can we make that breakthrough? So we move to this next stage where we use human creativity, human imagination, human intention, human insight, intuition, all these things to move to that next step.
That's what I'm calling the flowering of the potential when we go beyond this survival and go beyond this reptilian brain. And I think Darwinian theory has led us down a wrong road. I don't think it's the survival of the fittest. I think it's the survival of the group that cooperates, and it has been that.
Actually, you're probably right, because Darwin never used that phrase, survival of the fittest.
And Darwin was wrong anyway. He said that...
To some extent he was,
I believe it's through intention that people evolve, that organisms evolve.
If you believe in the consciousness model, then you're right. Intention orchestrates leaps of creativity that synchronistically give rise to new space-time events. I happen to agree with you.
So if we tell the new story, let's tell the new story in terms of human history and how that plays out with a global planet that's one consciousness. Talk about peace from that level.
I think for us to get to that level, we have to shift our identity. Who are we? You know, most people still identify with a tribal identity, an ethnic identity, a religious identity, a national identity, or you know, the identity becomes their immediate environment, their house, their physical body, their ego. These are limited identities. As we transcend these limited identities, even national identities, and get to the point where we can see that we are a single humanity, and even beyond that, get to the point that we see that we are a single consciousness that is differentiating into all these different expressions. That differentiation is not separation.
And so you're in this position where you can bridge the old culture to a new culture. And I think this is why you're addressing Obama.
This particular memo to Obama came about as a result of Rabbi Lerner, Michael Lerner's invitation to write this for his newsletter, and then it got picked up by the press.
Let's go through some of the points, if you want, of this memo, and then we'll address those because...
well, the points basically, you know, how do we move into a peace-based economy?
Right.
I mean, war is a big incentive for economic well-being to those who have made money through destruction. Blood money, karmically tainted money. Okay. Can we ever move to that? That requires a complete breakthrough. And you know, I honestly wonder if, despite the fact that we all, you know, rooted for Obama, that we elected him, all of us, in a sense, you know, the broader liberal movement elected President Obama. He's the symbolic expression of our collective consciousness at this moment, symbolic expression of our collective yearning, our collective longing, our collective idealism.
Absolutely.
But he's going to have many special interest groups pulling him in their direction. He will need an amazing amount of courage, tenacity, and he'll need to be totally self-referred. Now, obviously he has the potential. We saw it. That's why we brought him to where he is. And now when I say we, I mean, you know,
the world,
the collective consciousness and the world in a sense. But now is the test. Does Mr. Obama have the courage to do it? Does he have the will to do it? Does he have the tenacity to do it?
Does he have the power? Because there's so much invested in the military-industrial complex. After you read these points, I want to read what Eisenhower said in 1961.
Okay, so here it is. Mr. Obama, here are 9 points for you to think about. Number 1, scale out arms dealing and make it illegal by the year 2020. Arms dealing is the biggest export, one of the biggest exports. Aerospace and weapons of destruction, weapons of mechanized death are the biggest export of our great country. Can we do something about it? Number 2, can we write into every defense contract a requirement for a peacetime project, whether it's planting trees or repairing the ecosystem in some other way, or developing alternative energies and urban transportation. Number 3, can we subsidize conversion of military companies to peaceful uses with tax incentives and direct funding? Number 4, can we convert military bases to housing for the poor? Number 5, can we phase out all foreign military bases. Number 6, can we require military personnel to devote part of their time to rebuilding infrastructure, bridges, roads, infrastructure that is urban transportation using alternative energies. Number 7, can we call a moratorium on future weapons technologies? Some of our biggest research funding goes to the development of these future technologies for death, for mechanized death. By the way, Alan, can we use that same creativity to remove poverty? Can we use that same creativity to repair the ecosystem?
To make free energy machines, that get off an oil economy. I mean, we have that creativity.
In other words, can we use that creativity to talk about the new reality that you're talking about?
Absolutely.
So, can we call a moratorium on future weapons technologies? Number 8, can we reduce armaments like destroyers and submarines and aircraft carriers and airplanes, warplanes that have no use against terrorism anyway? Go ahead, what do you say?
I was just looking online. One F-35 fighter cost $6 billion. All right, please.
And finally, number 9, can we fully fund social services and take the balance out of the defense budget for doing this? These were 9 points, but if you're listening to this and if you're watching this, there's so much creativity out there, so much intelligence out there. What I would suggest is, you improve on these 9 points and actually come up with your own. Because if people are watching this show, Alan, there's no limit to which the human imagination, human creativity has no limitations. People who are watching this, listening to this, can come up with much better ideas than I have articulated in these 9 points. We need to change our conversation. We need to change our collective conversation, because the world that we see out there is a projection of the conversation that we have. And right now the conversation is war on terrorism, which is of course an oxymoron.
These points are great, and I'm totally in agreement, but this is a symptom of a mental disease, a disease of humanity that we have to get to the roots of, and the roots are greed, power, and fear.
Roots are power-mongering, greed, fear, cronyism, influence peddling, corruption, bureaucracy, an old way of thinking.
You're talking about getting rid of the military-industrial complex that supports probably millions of people and millions of dollars invested in it. They're worried about laying off people at General Motors. You lay off the military, you're going to have a huge problem.
You don't lay them off. You actually put them to really good, useful work. They are highly trained, highly disciplined people. The military people are some of the most disciplined, highly trained people who could actually be put to work in a way that could completely create a new infrastructure, not only for the United States, but for the rest of the world. The military people would be the ideal for humanitarian work also. Look at what they did when they had the tsunami in Southeast Asia. It was the military personnel that actually did a lot of great good work.
This guy, General Smedley, wrote a book called War is a Racket in 1933. He talked about how the U.S. economy has to go to war every couple of years.
Yeah, every few years we have a war.
Right, and so there's so much invested in making weapons. It's like the pharmaceutical companies. You think they really want to help people? They want to create drugs to give the doctors, to educate the doctors to give drugs. And it's like the health insurance company. Do they want to save people's lives, or do they want to make money?
There is a very limited place for a reductionist approach. Okay, so if you have pneumonia right now, I would give you an antibiotic.
Absolutely.
Okay, but we do know that when you cause a lot of collateral damage, which is called inflammation in the body, in the world, or in a system, then you get more violence. Okay, so you go to Iraq, you bomb the heck out of the country. According to conservative estimates, at least a few 100,000 people have died there.
I'm sure.
If you look at the Lancet, 600,000 people died in Iraq. Other studies suggest maybe over 1 million people. Okay, we don't talk about that, but those people are enraged and there is inflammation.
Absolutely.
And therefore, they will recruit or they will become terrorists even if they weren't.
Because they were attacked by, they think we're the terrorists because we
have a president who's called Barack Hussein Obama. Now, even though he's a Christian and is going to put his hand on a Christian Bible, he's going to say, I, Barack Hussein Obama, when he swears in. I think we are seeing a new America being born. And our president, by the way, he transcends national identity. You know, look at him. He was born in Hawaii, which only, you know, recently became a state, relatively. He grew up in Indonesia. His middle name is Hussein.
See,
so we are seeing a new
we're not just seeing a new America, we're seeing a new world where the merging of the populations are coming together to form the new humanity. And so what's stopping the new humanity is what Eisenhower said in 1961, the last speech he made before he left office. And he said, beware of the military-industrial complex and the influence they're going to exert over the population. And he was right. He predicted it, and they have taken over. They've built these unnecessary wars and this unnecessary weaponry. But how does Obama take on this huge industry of military and military weapons, where he almost seems powerless to stop the snowball going down this mountain?
I think the way he can do it, by the way, first, from everything I've heard, he's an amazing team leader. From everything I've heard, he's an amazing listener. From everything that is obvious, he's enormously intelligent himself. And you know, he has a website where he's asking people for suggestions. I think Mr. Obama is the right person. He has to be brave, he has to be true to himself, and once you create a conversation in the collective consciousness, that conversation is unstoppable, and once it reaches critical mass, then these people become actually obsolete. They become irrelevant. And you know, just like some of our biggest banks became irrelevant, insurance agencies became irrelevant, Wall Street, if it doesn't watch out, is becoming irrelevant. The Wall Street Journal, of course, has become irrelevant. So we are seeing the irrelevance of these major institutions because there's a shift in our collective consciousness.
Absolutely.
And we're going to see that tipping point soon. And of course, we're all on the side of Mr. Obama. We're rooting for him.
So what I think Obama has to do is start a world congress with all the leaders of all the countries and say, look, we're in one world. We can no longer think of ourselves as separate. How do we dismantle war among us and start to build peace among all nations as a single global entity? And he needs to do that. He needs to talk to all the leaders and say, okay, what does your populations need that we don't need to go to war over? And he needs to have this open dialogue with the leaders of the world.
He has to be tough. First of all, he has to be, it's apparent, okay, that we are one ecosystem. It's apparent. It's apparent that we are one economy. And I think it's apparent that we are one humanity if we get rid of our limited identities. So it's nothing that we are saying is not obvious.
Right.
But Mr. Obama needs to be tough. He needs to be tough with Saudi Arabia. It takes a lot of toughness to create peace. It takes no courage to create war. You know, war is created by bullies. But to create peace, you need a real hero. So Mr. Obama has to be tough with India. In that, our goal right now is to create peace. He has to be tough with Pakistan, in that you have the responsibility, if you want economic support from us, to get rid of these terrorists and their training camps or whatever they are. He has to be tough with Saudi Arabia, where all the money comes from. You know, they're our biggest allies. He has to be tough in his vision to create peace. And if he, you know, he doesn't have to listen to me, but he's listening to the collective consciousness right here, they're demanding it, they're requesting it. You have to be tough, Mr. Obama.
And he has to be tough with his own economy that depends on making weapons in order to put money into the pockets of corporations.
There have to be economic incentives bigger to create peace, bigger economic incentives to create peace than there are to create war.
My conclusion is that we have to understand that we are one people and one mind, and that in the core of us are beings that want to love and be loved. And we have to start to redirect people back to the basic needs and the basic value that human life is sacred.
If we understand consciousness, and that should be the new education for the future, and we understand how to navigate that territory that we call consciousness, then we have enormous creativity at our hands, and we can actually give birth to what you call the new reality.
Thank you, Deepak Chopra.
Thank you.
I hope Obama is listening and takes these points to heart, because we're building a new humanity and we're all part of it. And I want to thank one of the spokespeople for that, along with me, Alan Steinfeld, and Deepak Chopra for New Realities. Thank you for tuning in. I want to introduce people to my co-producer for this show, Tania, Kazi, who's international relations theorist and from Pakistan, and a woman with a lot of ideas and opinions about how we can bring peace to the world. So, Tania.
This is Tania Kazi with New Realities, and I have Deepak Chopra here, whom I'm going to ask about the memo that he has addressed to President-elect Barack Obama. When you talk about this military retrenchment, these 9 ideas, these 9 points that you have, are we just focusing through these ideas on the symptom of the disease and not the root cause itself? Do you think in some ways President-elect Obama has to focus on the US foreign policy rather than just going in there and retrenching military activity?
Yeah, US foreign policy has been based on self-interest all along, which is how usually foreign policies are based. They're based on the self-interest of the country, and they are in the short term quite effective. I remember a few years ago when somebody asked a State Department person, you've abandoned Afghanistan, they were your best friends, you know, when you were fighting the Russians and the Soviet Union, and during the Cold War, they were your best friends. You abandoned them. And the State Department official responded by saying, we don't have friends, we only have interests. Well, that is how foreign policy officials are trained. Look after your interests. It's what is known as a reductionist short-term approach. And in the short term, it does work. But in the long term, it actually it aggravates the problem. Having abandoned the Afghanis, who had amazing training from the Americans, who were given weapons by the Americans, and then were left unto themselves, what was left behind was rage, abandonment, and weapons. Okay. In fact, I heard a Taliban leader being interviewed by my son once. You know, my son used to be a war correspondent, and he was in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and this Taliban leader said the US treated us like prostitutes. They used us, gave us a little money, and then they abandoned us. So I think US foreign policy has to now go to a new level where it's the interest of the world. It's like what's happening everywhere. You know, the ecology is the interest of the world. The economy is the interest of the world. We are being forced into that position. You cannot kill terrorists. I mean, you can kill terrorists, but you cannot kill an ideology that is born in a certain context. And that context has a historical perspective, a cultural perspective, an economic context, and has a lot to do with our own foreign policies.
So given that, you must feel relatively confident, especially when President-elect was in his, the campaign was going full-fledged, and the result of the election had not come out yet, and he kept talking about wanting to talk to Iran as opposed to threatening them or having the posture that the US has always had toward Iran, for instance. And his suggestion that we should talk and have bilateral discussion and dialogue. would probably give you more confidence in the fact that he might be on the right track, which is why you...
There are certain principles that have been understood in recent times that should be actually be much more available to the person out there. If you want to resolve a conflict, here are things you should be willing to do. Number one, you should be willing to talk, but talk with respect, because the number one cause of rage in the world is lack of respect and belligerence and humiliation. Number two, in any conflict, you should realize that both parties feel injustice. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a conflict. The fact that there's a conflict, there are two parties that feel injustice. Number three, in any conflict, you should make room for humility, asking for forgiveness, and be willing to give forgiveness. Number four, you should refrain from belligerence, something that our current president is unable to do. I mean, he walks with belligerence, he talks with belligerence, he smirks with belligerence. Number five, you should understand that there is such a thing called emotional intelligence that anybody can learn. You know, it means being in touch with your own feelings, it means in touch with the feelings of your adversaries, and it means managing relationship intelligently. Number six, in any dialogue, there should be an understanding of other people's values, because they do have values. I was part of a scientific survey done by Gallup, and we surveyed the equivalent of 600 million Muslims in 10 countries. It wasn't a minor survey. We included Pakistan and Morocco and Saudi Arabia and Iran, Iraq, and we were very pleasantly surprised by the values that people have in these countries, that the vast majority of people are not terrorists or even moderates. The vast majority of people want the elderly to be treated with respect, want to help the poor, are interested in entrepreneurship, are interested in economic well-being, want to send their children to school. We don't even know those values. We stereotype everybody because of the popular media. So we need to understand each other's values. Of course, the other side needs to understand our values, and when you actually look at each other's values, you say they're the same. You know, our beliefs may divide us. Our beliefs, religious beliefs, usually tend to divide people, but the values unite them. So we need to bring that into discussion. At the same time, we need to understand that everybody comes from fear, that if you start to prove the other person wrong, which is what we do all the time in our foreign policy, these are simple principles that should become part of our discussion and should become part of our training of people when we train them as diplomats, but they're not yet.
As a matter of fact, this belligerence and this, one-upmanship has caused even the moderates across the world to take on a more extremist stance because they feel constantly victimized.
We need, as our foreign policy, to harness the help and creativity of the moderates by not alienating them, by making them part of the discussion. At the same time, the moderates have to start taking a stance, which they did. You know, something that happened which was very impressive in Mumbai is that the Muslim leaders in Mumbai and the Hindu leaders in Mumbai got together. And they said, we are not going to allow this to alienate us. In fact, the Muslim leaders went on record as saying that none of these terrorists will be buried in a Muslim cemetery. Now that was a huge statement coming from Muslim leaders, and a very responsible statement, made it almost impossible for the Hindu fundamentalists who would otherwise have reacted to do anything, because they were disarmed by this statement.
How do you think the US plays a role now, given what you suggested? How does the new president-elect, how should he focus on this conflagration that's constantly brewing between India and Pakistan, especially given the recent Mumbai?
I think the India-Pakistan situation is very complex, and I wish there was a very simple solution. There isn't. But a good start would be that President-elect Obama is tough with both sides. You know, as I said earlier in a different interview, the US and India have come up with a nuclear deal. It's not a nuclear arms deal, it's a nuclear cooperation deal, but in the mind of the ordinary person, it doesn't make a difference. If you have nuclear technology, it could be used for weapons as well. This has obviously caused a lot of distress everywhere else, including India's neighbors in Pakistan. So this is an opportunity for Mr. Obama to use that as a lever to be tough on India and make sure that at no cost India will resort or even attempt a violent solution or an act of what they call retribution or react. At the same time, Mr. Obama has to be tough with Pakistan, in that if we know where these terrorists are trained, if we know where the money supply is coming from, you know, Pakistan right now needs economic support from the United States, and that economic support should be aimed at creating a powerful economic Pakistan, not necessarily a powerful military Pakistan, because you know, if you focus only on the military, you do it at the cost of everything else in development. So instead of right now the United States is giving a lot of military aid to Pakistan. By the way, it's also selling weapons to India. So the United States is selling weapons to both sides. You know, in fact, I know of weapons manufacturers who are private companies from the United States. They go to India, make a good weapons deal, then they go to Dubai, rest for a few days, and then they go to Pakistan and make the same deal. So, you know, while American companies are making a lot of money, they're basically giving weapons of mechanized death to both sides. They have to look at that honestly. Do we replace our military aid with economic aid? Do we put a stop to this weapons trading? Do we help with education and awareness? There's lots of things the United States can do on both sides.
Speaking of mechanized death, let's bring our attention to the Middle East. How do you feel about Mr. Obama's silence on the current Gaza-Israel crisis?
I would like to believe that Mr. Obama's silence is for the reasons he has explicitly stated, which is that there can only be one president at a time, and that he's using this time to really incubate and come up with the most creative and hopefully the toughest solution for this problem. And only America can do it right now. You know, I think there is no question that Hamas is intent, at least they declare their intention, that they do not believe in the survival of Israel. So even though the other Arab surrounding states have acknowledged that Israel has a right to exist, they have not been very vocal about it. In fact, they have used the Palestinians as a football. You know, the Palestinians are a miserable people. They have no homeland. They're extremely poor. Less than 1% of Arab money could take care of rebuilding Gaza, educating the people in Gaza, but they don't do it. And you know, the Americans don't put any pressure on the Arab world to do that. At the same time, America has to be tougher on Israel. There's not any reason to attack these poor people, even though the terrorists are hiding among civilian populations over there to their advantage. There's, you know, if you look at those pictures coming out from Gaza, they are horrendous. What's happening to the civilian population. But America can put pressure on both sides. America can tell Israel, stop it. Okay, you're using our weapons to do it. America can put pressure on the Arab world and say, stop it.
But America is providing Israel the weapons.
America is providing everybody the weapons. Right. You see, our oil money goes to the Arabs. who buy weapons too. I mean, and if they don't do it directly, which they do, they also, you know, from Qatar and all these places, they do it in Pakistan, they do it in other countries. So, you know, we are fueling all sides of the conflict, and it comes to ultimately greed. Now, this is a very, very incendiary thing to say, that we are doing it. But most of us are not aware that we are funding all sides of the conflict. And we need to change that conversation. That, you know, if America has been given this role of being the world leader, and if it wants to maintain that role of being the world leader, it may not. Because, you know, America, if we don't watch out with what's happening on Wall Street and the economic corruption and the cronyism and the bureaucracy and the influence peddling and the power mongering that goes among the rich elite in America, if we don't watch out, America could be finished. You know, the emerging economies right now are China and Southeast Asia, and to some extent India. And in the future of the world will be economic and cultural power, not military power, if we are to survive.
So we focus on trade and we focus on economic infrastructure
I think
and
that's
education.
the only thing. Economic partnerships and peace economies. You know, you talk about Kashmir. I mean, it's such a hot topic. But one thing that was encouraging is that the Kashmiris now had an election which was legitimate. They elected their own government. But Kashmir could be the playground of the East. It could be the, you know, skiing center for people who want to ski in the Himalayas. And all you have to do is you have to have cooperation between the Kashmiris and the Pakistanis and the Indians, that, you know, this belongs to all of us, and Kashmiris, you take it, you do what you want to with it. And, you know, if these countries start to build economic partnerships, this could be the resort of the world. And it would bring affluence and abundance to everyone.
So the money made that way, would that be directly in competition with the money that's made when we are warmongering? Would that be as much? Is that as much benefit, you think? Is
the
that why?
warmongering makes money for a very few people.
Right.
Okay? A handful of people. The peace-mongering will make money for a lot of people.
Masses.
You know, the word jihad originally means self-sacrifice and struggle to go beyond the ego to the universal domain. And so it's actually a good word which has been corrupted. And Muslim is such a beautiful word because it means to serve.
I think that's where the, you know, the moderate Muslim has also become an extremist, unfortunately, is because the original essence, the meaning of the word jihad means struggle against your own self, which is why they fast the 30 days.
Against your own limited self, yes.
Yeah, your own self, and allow for the higher self to emerge. But it has
and Muslim means to surrender to the universal,
completely.
to submit, yeah.
Absolutely. So, and that has gotten corrupted because there is a minority that has felt very abused in the process.
We need to revive the Sufi
Culture,
traditions of Islam in a big way. You know, it's the feminine aspect of Islam that has not been seen by the West. Only recently, when you talk of Rumi or, you know,
I think it
Hafiz
first
and
needs
these
to be
people.
embraced by the mainstream Muslims themselves, you see. That's where that's at.
You know, if religion doesn't keep up with cosmology or evolution, it becomes irrelevant. And yet, of course, when people are unaware, that's all they resort to. And if you look at the origins of religion, they're based on an experience which was more universal, whether it was Muhammad or Buddha or Jesus.
And I think you're absolutely right. Earlier when you made that suggestion that we are at crossroads rather than, you know, at the threshold of a new reality per se, I think that we are at crossroads because we can either there are people who have completely resorted to becoming orthodoxical in their thinking about their religion because they feel harmed, they feel insecure, or we could go the other way, which is embrace cosmology and the oneness of the universe. But there is obviously, at this point, there is that element where, you know, people feel like it's been bubbling over for a while, and people feel that they need to go back to their roots and go back to who they are. And
and the only thing that will, by the way, influence which way we go is the conversation in the media, the conversation in the world of education, entertainment, the conversation on the web, the conversation in cyberspace. So I think it's very important that we're having this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.